Inside Sing Sing, where death row was born. The chair is humming. The room is silent, but not empty. A single wooden chair sits in the center, heavy, thick, and bolted to the floor. Its leather straps look old, cracked from years of fear and sweat. The metal cap on top is waiting, hanging over the seat like a threat. A buzzing sound fills the air, a hum, low but steady, like electricity warming up. A guard whispers, "This is where they sat, every man who came through death row." We are inside Sing Sing Correctional Facility, one of the oldest, most feared prisons in the United States. The place where America's death row system was born. A place where thousands of men waited for the day the heavy door opened and their name was called. As you stand in that cold room, the air feels too thick to breathe. The walls keep secrets, secrets about guilt, innocence, fear, and final moments. But the real story of how Sing Sing became the birthplace of death row starts long before this room ever turned dark. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The prison by the river. The year was 1825. Most people in America had never even heard the phrase, death row. Back then, executions happened quickly, usually in public squares. But New York State wanted a new way, something quiet, something controlled, something hidden. So they built a prison on the banks of the Hudson River, in a small town called Ossining. The walls were made from stone carved by the prisoners themselves. The work was dangerous. Men used heavy tools with chains on their ankles. Many got hurt. Some didn't survive. The locals soon gave the prison a nickname, Sing Sing. Not because of music, not because of joy, but because the Native American land it stood on was once called Sing Sing. Inside these walls, prisoners lived in tiny cells barely the size of a small bathroom. The windows were narrow, the iron doors thick, and the nights cold. Guards walked the hallway with lanterns swinging left and right, shadows stretching across the walls like long arms. But the most frightening part wasn't the cells. It was the new idea the state was planning. A new system, a new room, a new way to carry out executions. And Sing Sing was chosen to be the center of it all. Rumors spread among the inmates. They're building a chair that kills, a chair that burns you without fire. Some men refused to believe it. Others prayed every night. But one thing was clear. Something historic was coming. Something America had never seen before. Something that would turn Sing Sing into the most feared prison in the country. So, death row would be born. The first execution. The prison woke up before sunrise. The guards moved quietly, speaking in short whispers. The warden walked with a small notebook in his hand. Every step he took echoed down the stone hallway. Something heavy was coming, something nobody in America had ever witnessed before. The inmates felt it too. Some stood on their toes to look through the tiny bars of their doors. Others sat on their beds, frozen, listening. Word had spread through the blocks. Today is the day. They're using the chair for the first time. The man chosen for this first execution was William Kemmler, convicted of murder. He wasn't brought to a public square. There was no large crowd shouting or cheering. Instead, he was brought to a small room inside Sing Sing, a room with a wooden chair waiting in the center. Reporters and officials stood around the walls. Everybody was silent. As Kemmler sat down, the guard strapped his arms and legs. They fastened the leather belt across his chest. They placed the metal cap on his head. No one moved. Even the air felt like it had stopped. The warden cleared his throat and gave a single nod. A switch was pulled. The room filled with the sound of electricity humming, then roaring. Some people turned away. Some wrote notes with shaking hands. Others watched like they were witnessing the future. Something new, something powerful, something terrifying. It didn't go smoothly. Kemmler shook violently. The smell of burning cloth filled the room. A reporter fainted. Another one whispered, "My God, is this the world we're creating?" But after a long struggle, the room fell quiet again. And with that, the electric chair became real. No longer a rumor. No longer a story. It was the new face of death in America. The prisoners in the cell blocks didn't see what happened, but they felt the moment. A cold wave passed through the building. Men looked at each other without speaking. Everyone knew. If you were sent to Sing Sing after that day, the chair could be waiting for you. And slowly, a new area was created inside the prison. A place where prisoners would wait for their date with the chair. A place with locked doors, strict rules, and endless nights. That place was death row. And it would soon fill with stories of fear, regret, hope, and survival. The birth of death row. Death row at Sing Sing did not start as a big block or a special building. At first, it was just a small group of cells, dark, cold, and separated from the rest of the prison. But as more men were sentenced to die in the electric chair, those cells began to fill. The guards gave the area a simple name, the row, because the men in those cells were not serving time. They were waiting for appeals, waiting for lawyers, waiting for the warden's footsteps, waiting for the last letter from family, waiting for the day the heavy steel door opened and their life ended. Life on the row. Every man on death row lived with a schedule that never changed. They woke up early to the sound of metal keys jingling. Breakfast was pushed through a small slot in the door. They were allowed to shower under watch. They spent most of their day alone, staring at walls. Some read books. Some wrote letters. Some prayed. Some cried when no one was watching. The silence was the worst part. You could hear almost everything. The guards walking, the other inmates coughing, the river water hitting the rocks outside, and sometimes the electric generator starting its slow warm-up. Men would whisper, "Who is it for? Is it my time? Did someone lose their last appeal?" And when the generator went silent again, everyone breathed out, slow, shaky, grateful. The last walk. When a man's day finally came, guards would take him from his cell early in the morning. This walk became known as the last mile. It wasn't actually a mile long, but to the men walking it, it felt endless. Every step meant they were closer to the chair, closer to the moment no one returns from. Guards said that some prisoners shook so hard that they needed help walking. Others stayed calm, almost too calm, as if they had accepted everything. A few talked about their regrets. Some said nothing at all. But every man took that same walk, down the long hallway, through the final door, into the room with the wooden chair. And Sing Sing became the place the nation watched. Newspapers called it the House of Death. Reporters waited outside the gates whenever an execution was scheduled. Families traveled long distances hoping for a miracle or a final goodbye. But death row wasn't only about fear. It was also about stories, stories of guilt, hope, injustice, courage, mistakes, and humanity. Some men confessed. Some fought for their innocence. Some changed into better people in their final days. And some left questions behind that were never answered. But all of these stories built the legend of Sing Sing, the place where death row was born. The men who waited. Death row at Sing Sing was never just a place. It was a world inside a world, quiet, tight, and heavy with emotion. Every man who entered those narrow cells carried a story. Some stories were tragic. Some were terrifying. Some were confusing. And some, even decades later, still leave people wondering if justice was truly served. Different crimes, same ending. The men on the row came from different lives. Some were young, barely adults. Some were middle-aged fathers who made one terrible mistake. Others had long histories with crime and violence. But once they crossed the threshold into death row, they all became the same thing. Men waiting for their final day. No matter who they were before. No matter how rich, poor, scared, or tough. They all slept with the same thought. Will I ever leave this place alive? The voices in the night. The nights were long on death row. Guards said you could hear everything. Soft crying, praying, pacing, and sometimes sudden screams. Not because someone was hurt, but because fear finally took over. One guard said, "Death row has two kinds of silence, the silence of peace, and the silence right before a man breaks." Some prisoners talked to their neighbors through the walls. They shared stories, regrets, jokes, and memories of the outside world. Some became close, like brothers. Others stayed quiet, trapped inside their own minds. Letters from home. Mail became the most important thing. A short letter from a mother, a girlfriend, a child, even a short message saying "we're thinking of you," could change a whole week for a death row inmate. But sometimes the letters stopped. Families moved on. People died. People grew tired. And the silence that followed hurt more than any sentence. Some men kept their last letters folded under their pillows until the day they walked the final mile. The priests, rabbis, and ministers, spiritual leaders, became a big part of daily life on death row. They visited all men, guilty or innocent, and never judged them. Sometimes the priest would sit for hours talking about hope. Other times he just sat quietly inside the cell, giving the inmate someone to simply exist with. A former chaplain once said, "Some men wanted forgiveness. Some wanted answers. Some just didn't want to die alone." The man who drew birds. There was a prisoner who spent years drawing pictures of birds, beautiful drawings with shadows, feathers, and amazing detail. But he never used color. When a guard asked why, the man answered softly, "Birds are free. The only color they have in here is in my mind." His drawings never left the row, but his words floated through the prison for decades. A small glimpse of humanity. For all the darkness, Sing Sing's death row also had rare moments of humanity. A guard giving an extra cup of water. A prisoner sharing his last cookie with the man next door. A chaplain holding someone's hand through the bars. A last meal cooked with care. A prisoner forgiving someone who hurt him long ago. These small moments didn't erase what happened, but they showed that even in the hardest places, people still try to be human. The weight of time. But time is heavy on death row. Some men stayed for years. Some stayed for decades. Some watched the world change through newspapers and tiny TV screens. Presidents came and left, wars started and ended, technology grew, and life moved forward, while they stayed in the same small cell, waiting. And the hardest part? They never knew which sunrise would be their last. The executioner's room. The execution room at Sing Sing was not large or fancy. It was simple, quiet, cold, and unforgettable. To most people, it looked like just another room with white walls and a wooden chair. But to the men who worked there, and the men who entered it for the last time, it was the heaviest room in the entire prison. The guards who never forgot. Not every guard at Sing Sing worked the execution detail. Only a select group was chosen, and they didn't choose the job themselves. They were assigned. Some guards hated it. Some tried to treat it like any other duty. But all of them carried the memories with them for the rest of their lives. One retired guard once said, "You don't forget the sound of the door closing behind a man who won't walk out again." They had to prepare the room hours before dawn. Check the straps. Test the switches. Clean the chair. Make sure everything worked. It wasn't a job anyone spoke proudly about. The warden's heavy role. The warden had a duty no one envied. He had to announce the time. He had to read the final order. He had to stand in the room, face the condemned prisoner, and give a small nod when the moment came. It was his job, but it was also his burden. Many wardens quietly said the same thing. Each execution takes a piece of your soul. The chair itself. The electric chair at Sing Sing was made of heavy oak. It wasn't shiny. It wasn't decorated. It wasn't built to scare. It was built to end lives quickly. The leather straps were thick so no one could move. The armrests were wide. The leg supports were strong. The metal cap that went on the prisoner's head looked like a helmet without a face. Men who saw it up close said it felt like the chair was staring back. Some prisoners refused to look directly at it during rehearsals or inspections. Some asked the chaplain to stand between them and the chair so they wouldn't see it. Others stared at it calmly, accepting their fate. The last preparations. Before a prisoner entered the room, he got a clean uniform. He was offered a last meal. He could make a final statement. A spiritual leader stood by his side. His hands were wiped with alcohol to help the electric current pass. Everything was done with strict rules. No shouting. No rushing. No panic. The guards moved slowly, carefully, almost respectfully, even if the man had done terrible things. Because in that moment, he was still a human being living his final minutes. Witnesses in the back. A small group of people watched every execution. The warden, doctor, local officials, sometimes reporters, sometimes the victim's family. They stood behind a barrier, silent, watching. No one was allowed to take pictures or film. Some witnesses cried quietly. Some covered their mouths. Some refused to look at the moment the switch was flipped. And some, especially family members of victims, stood firm, staring straight ahead, wanting to see the final moment of the person who changed their lives forever. The switch. When the time came, the executioners stood behind a small wall, away from the prisoner's sight. There were 2 switches, only one was real. This allowed the person flipping the switch to never know for sure if they delivered the fatal current. It was designed this way to help protect their conscience. Everyone in the room felt the same heavy moment. The warden gave the nod. The executioner pulled the switch. The room filled with humming electricity. The prisoner's body went stiff. And then, silence. The aftermath. The doctor checked the prisoner's pulse. The warden wrote down the time. The chair cooled. The guards removed the straps. The body was taken out quietly, and the room was cleaned for the next time the state ordered a life to end. Some guards stayed away from that room for days afterward. Some prayed. Some couldn't sleep. Some quit the job entirely. Because Sing Sing's execution room wasn't just a place of death. It was a place that changed everyone who entered it, forever. Famous cases that shocked America. Over the years, Sing Sing's death row became known across the entire country. Newspapers printed headlines in big bold letters. Radio announcers talked about it with shaking voices. Families sat around their living rooms listening to updates. Because some of the men sent to Sing Sing were at the center of cases that shocked the nation. Cases filled with mystery, fear, and huge public attention. Cases people are still talking about today. The case of Ruth Snyder and Judd Gray, the lovers who planned a death. This case was so famous that the entire country followed it like a movie. In the 1920s, Ruth Snyder and her secret boyfriend, Judd Gray, were accused of planning her husband's murder. When the police questioned them, each one blamed the other. He made me do it. Gray said, no, she planned everything. The public didn't know who to believe. When they were both sentenced to the electric chair at Sing Sing, it became one of the biggest stories in American history. Newspapers sold thousands of copies every day just to give updates on the case. On the night of their execution, reporters waited in the rain outside the prison gates. Inside the execution room, witnesses watched in silence as Ruth Snyder became the first woman to be executed at Sing Sing in the electric chair. Her case became a warning that the law did not care if you were a man or a woman. If the court found you guilty, the row was waiting. The case of Machine Gun Kelly's henchmen. During the gangster era, crime was exploding across America. Robberies, kidnappings, shootouts. Some of the most dangerous criminals ended up at Sing Sing. A group of men connected to the famous gangster Machine Gun Kelly were convicted of kidnapping wealthy businessmen. Their crimes shook the city, and newspapers called them public enemies. Some of these men ended up on death row. They were known for their tough personalities, but even they couldn't escape the fear of the chair. One guard said, they acted brave in the dayroom, but at night you could hear them pacing back and forth. Tough guys still get scared. Case of the wrongfully accused man. Not all cases were clear. Not all cases were fair. One man, whose name was kept quiet for many years, claimed he was innocent from the day he arrived on death row. He wrote letters to anyone who would listen. Journalists, lawyers, churches, and even strangers. He told them, I didn't do what they say I did. Most ignored him. Some believed him but had no power to help. But one young lawyer took an interest and began digging through the old files. What he found shocked him. Missing evidence. Mistaken witnesses. Confusing reports. A rushed investigation. The lawyer fought hard for years. He filed appeal after appeal after appeal. But time was running out faster than the paperwork. The case forced America to ask a serious question. What if someone who didn't commit a crime ends up on death row? This question would later play a huge role in changing how the justice system worked, and how America viewed the power of life and death. The final confessions. Some of the most shocking stories came from men who confessed right before their execution. In their last hours, some told guards or chaplains truths they never shared before, apologies they waited years to say, secrets they kept to protect someone else, or admissions that changed how the public viewed their cases. These final words were not written in newspapers. They weren't shouted in courtrooms. They were whispered in a quiet cell, with minutes left on the clock. The chaplain once said, "When the last hour comes, people tell the truth in ways they never could before." Why these cases mattered? These stories turned Sing Sing into more than just a prison. It became a symbol, a place the country looked at whenever they talked about crime, punishment, justice, and mercy. Some believed the electric chair brought justice. Some believed it brought fear. Some believed it brought mistakes. But everyone agreed on one thing. Sing Sing was where America's most difficult questions were asked, and sometimes answered. The last meals and final words. In Sing Sing, when a man reached the end of all his appeals, all his legal chances, and all his hope for delay, the prison followed a strict and respectful routine. Not because they wanted to be kind, but because this was the law. And these were a person's final hours on earth. These final moments revealed more about humanity than any courtroom ever could. The final 24 hours. Everything changed when the warden signed the final order. The condemned man was moved to a special death watch cell, closer to the execution chamber. Guards sat outside his door at all times. A chaplain checked on him regularly. Lights stayed on through the night. Some prisoners slept. Most didn't. Some stared at the ceiling for hours, replaying their life in their head. Others cried silently into their pillows, hoping no one could hear. A few wrote letters to their families, apologizing, explaining, or simply saying goodbye. The last meal. One of the most well-known traditions on death row was the last meal. In Sing Sing, the condemned man could request almost anything within reason. Fried chicken, eggs and bacon, even simple food like oatmeal or bread. Some men ordered big meals, plates full of food they hadn't tasted in years. But many ordered almost nothing. A chaplain explained once, "A man about to die doesn't care about food." Some only asked for a cup of coffee. One prisoner requested just an apple. He held it for a long time before eating it, saying it reminded him of his childhood. Another asked for a slice of chocolate cake, because his mother used to bake it every Sunday. These meals were small windows into the lives they once lived, and the memories they carried to the end. The final words. Before the execution, the condemned man was allowed to make a final statement. This was optional. Some spoke for minutes. Some said only one sentence. Some stayed silent. And each final statement revealed the truth of a person's last moments. Some apologized. They turned toward the victim's family and said words that made the room cry. Some forgave. One prisoner said, "I forgive everyone who ever hurt me. I hope someone forgives me too." Some claimed innocence. A few men stood by their words until the very end. "I did not do this." Some asked for peace. Another whispered, "Tell my mother I am not afraid." Some spoke about life. One man said, "If I ever had a second chance, I'd use it better." Some said nothing. Silent. Still. Accepting. Every final word became part of Sing Sing's long and complicated history. The walk to the chair. When the time came, guards opened the cell slowly. They spoke gently, even to the toughest prisoners. "Are you ready? Would you like the chaplain to walk with you? Do you want to say anything else?" The man's hands were usually cuffed. He walked down the quiet hallway, the last mile. Some walked fast, wanting it to be over. Some moved slowly, trembling with each step. Some looked up and whispered prayers. Others looked straight ahead, focusing on the door at the end. No one walked alone. Guards stayed beside them. The chaplain walked behind them. Every step echoed like a drum. When they reached the execution room, the door closed behind them, and everyone inside knew. This was the final page of their story. Why these moments matter. What happened in those last minutes. The meals, the words, the walk, reminded everyone at Sing Sing of one thing. A prison can take a life, but it cannot take humanity. Even men who made terrible mistakes still felt fear, love, regret, hope, and memory. And the people who witnessed these moments never forgot them. Life for the guards, chaplains, and witnesses. Most people only think about the prisoners on death row. But inside Sing Sing, the system didn't just affect the men waiting for execution. It shaped the lives of the guards, the chaplains, the doctors, and even the witnesses who stood in the room on execution nights. Some worked at Sing Sing for decades. Some stayed only a few years before the job became too heavy. All of them carried memories they could never forget. The guards, we had to be strong even when we weren't. Guards on death row lived with a different kind of pressure. They weren't just watching inmates. They were watching men who were going to die. They had to deliver meals, escort prisoners to showers, check on them during the night, listen when they cried, listen when they prayed, listen when they begged for news from their lawyers. And when the time came, they had to walk those same men to the execution room. One guard later said, "I watched tough men fall apart. I watched quiet men face death bravely. And when I went home, my kids wondered why I hugged them so tight." Some guards became numb. Some became soft. Some suffered nightmares for years. But inside Sing Sing, guards followed the rule. Do your job. Don't judge. Don't break. Even when their hearts were heavy. The chaplains, we saw the best and worst sides of humanity. Chaplains played a unique role. They were the only people who spoke to every man on death row. No matter his crime, no matter his age, no matter his past. They offered conversation, company, comfort, understanding. Some chaplains saw men transform in their final weeks. Men who once refused to talk suddenly opened up, confessed, apologized, and begged for forgiveness. One chaplain said the hardest moment wasn't the walk to the chair, but the moment before it, when a man grabs your hand and asks, "Will it hurt?" And you can't lie, but you can't scare him either. Chaplains cried too, but never in front of the prisoners. They waited until they were alone in a small office and let their emotions out in silence. The doctors, we had to stand in the room until it was over. Doctors had a strict legal role. They stood in the back. They checked the prisoner's pulse. They confirmed the time of death. They signed the documents. Some doctors handled emergency surgeries and medical crises in the prison during the day, and then stood in the execution room at night. It was a job with no middle ground. One doctor said, "You care for a man, and then you watch him die. Nothing can prepare you for that." The witnesses, one moment changed them forever. Witnesses included journalists, clerks, local officials, sometimes the victim's family, sometimes the prisoner's family. Each person watched the execution from a small section separated by a barrier. Some fainted. Some cried. Some held onto the wall for balance. Some stood frozen, unable to move. Many witnesses wrote later that the room felt colder than any place they had ever been. A reporter described one execution like this. When the switch was pulled, everyone stopped breathing. The hum of electricity felt like it went through us too. Some left the prison shaking. Some never wrote about another execution again. Some said they never slept well for weeks afterward. The cost of the job. Sing Sing wasn't just a workplace. It was an emotional weight. People who worked there didn't brag about it. Many didn't even tell their friends what they did for a living. When an execution happened, guards went home quiet. Chaplains sat alone in their offices. Doctors washed their hands, staring at the sink. Witnesses walked out with pale faces. Even the warden locked his door and said nothing. One guard summed it up perfectly. "We didn't just carry keys. We carried stories we could never tell." Why these people matter? The men on death row weren't the only ones living inside a system built on fear, law, justice, and death. The staff lived it too. The witnesses lived it. The whole prison lived it. And every execution at Sing Sing changed someone. Whether it was a prisoner, a guard, a chaplain, or a stranger standing in the back of the room. Death row left a mark on everyone. The controversies, reforms, and a closer look at justice. As the years went by, Sing Sing didn't just hold prisoners. It held debates. It held questions. It held the weight of a nation trying to understand justice. Because death row wasn't just about punishment. It was about right, wrong, fairness, humanity, and the frightening possibility of mistakes. The world began to look closely at Sing Sing, and what they saw forced America to rethink the death penalty itself. The public divide: is it justice? Or is it too much? Across America, people argued. Some said the electric chair was necessary. They believed it protected society and delivered justice for victims. Others said it was too harsh, too final, too dangerous if the system made even one mistake. Radio shows debated it. Newspapers published long articles. Church groups held meetings. Lawyers battled in courtrooms. Sing Sing became the symbol of this national argument. When an execution happened, some saw justice being served, while others saw a human life being taken by the state. The question of innocence. One of the biggest controversies was the possibility that an innocent person could be executed. Cases where evidence was weak. Cases where witnesses changed their stories. Cases where prosecutors made mistakes. Cases where the truth was unclear. People started to ask, what if innocence was discovered too late? Even a few guards whispered among themselves, I hope we never carried out the wrong sentence. These fears pushed lawyers, activists, and reporters to investigate old cases and fight for fairness. The case that changed everything. There was one case at Sing Sing that deeply troubled the public. A man, quiet, young, and always respectful, claimed he was innocent from the very first day. His case had holes. A rushed investigation. Missing evidence. Confused witnesses. A lawyer who didn't do enough. For years, people ignored him. But as time passed, more people started looking into the case. A journalist discovered a problem in the original report. A new lawyer found inconsistencies in the witness statements. A church group began raising awareness. But despite all of this, the clock ran out. The man was executed. Months later, a piece of new evidence was found. Evidence that suggested he might have been telling the truth all along. This shock spread across the country. It sparked protests, debates, and demands for reform. And Sing Sing found itself at the center of a storm no prison wanted to face. Reforms begin. The system must change. After years of controversy, New York and other states began to push for changes in how death penalty cases were handled. These reforms included better legal representation, stronger appeals, higher standards for evidence, more scientific testing, including early DNA work, stricter rules to prevent wrongful convictions. The public demanded transparency. They wanted fairness. They wanted the system to be more careful with something as final as death. And slowly, Sing Sing's role began to change. The decline of the electric chair. As the 20th century progressed, debates grew louder. Was the electric chair humane? Was it outdated? Was it too painful? Was it necessary anymore? Photos, eyewitness accounts, and stories from inside the execution room caused many Americans to rethink their views. Some states replaced the chair with other methods. Others paused executions entirely, and courts nationwide examined whether the electric chair violated human rights. Sing Sing, once the center of death row, began seeing fewer and fewer executions. The buzzing hum of the chair became rarer. The witness room grew dusty. The last mile was walked less often. And eventually, New York made a decision that changed everything. The death penalty would no longer be used. Looking back, what did Sing Sing teach us? Sing Sing didn't just shape history. It shaped the way America understood punishment and justice. It forced people to ask, how should society deal with terrible crimes? How do we protect the innocent? How do we ensure fairness? Can a system that ends lives ever be perfect? Who carries the emotional cost? Prisoners, families, guards, or all of them? Death row opened painful conversations, but it also pushed America toward better legal protections, deeper investigations, and a stronger focus on truth. A prison full of questions. By the end of the century, Sing Sing had changed. Death row slowly faded. The electric chair room became a symbol, not a place of daily fear. But the questions Sing Sing raised still echo today. What is justice? What is mercy? And how do we protect both? Those questions continue to shape America's legal system to this day. The legacy of Sing Sing, and what remains today. Sing Sing is not just a prison anymore. It's a symbol, a place where America's deepest questions about justice, punishment, mercy, and humanity were carved into history like words in stone. Even today, when people hear the name Sing Sing, they feel something. A chill. A memory. A story. A warning. Because once, behind those stone walls by the Hudson River, the modern idea of death row was born. And even though the electric chair has gone silent, its legacy remains. The prison still stands, but different. Today, Sing Sing Correctional Facility still operates in New York. Thousands of men are held there, but the world inside its walls has changed. Death row is gone. The electric chair no longer operates. Executions are no longer carried out in New York. But the history hasn't disappeared. The old execution room is still there, untouched, silent, preserved as a reminder of what once happened inside those walls. Visitors who see the room today say the air feels different, like the past hasn't fully left. The Hudson River still sees everything. Sing Sing sits right next to the river. Every sunrise still hits the old stone walls. Every wave still touches the rocks at the base of the prison. Decades ago, prisoners carved those stones with their own hands. They built the walls that later became their own cages. People say the river holds memories too. Memories of screams, footsteps, last walks, and whispered prayers. The river doesn't forget. And neither does Sing Sing. The stories live on. Books, documentaries, museums, and historians all study Sing Sing's role in shaping the justice system. They talk about the first electric chair, the first executions, the famous cases, the wrongful convictions, the guards who broke down, the inmates who transformed, the families who stood in witness rooms, the controversies that changed laws. These stories aren't told to scare people, but to teach them, to remind the world that justice must be careful, must be fair, must be honest, must be thorough, because lives depend on it. A future built on lessons. Sing Sing teaches us that a system is not perfect. There were successes. There were failures. There were triumphs. There were tragedies. And from all of that came reforms. Stronger legal protections. Better defense teams. Scientific evidence like DNA. More transparent trials. Better understanding of mental health. And a country more aware of the cost of taking a life. Sing Sing's past shaped the future. The human side of the legacy. Behind every headline was a real person. A man on death row. A guard who couldn't sleep. A mother waiting by the phone. A lawyer fighting until the last second. A chaplain trying to comfort a soul in pain. A witness shaking after what they saw. These human stories are what makes Sing Sing impossible to forget. Even long after the electric chair stopped buzzing, the emotions, the lessons, the memories remain. Why the legacy still matters? Because when we talk about Sing Sing, we talk about justice, fairness, truth, mistakes, responsibility, and humanity. We talk about how a nation learns, grows, and corrects itself. We talk about what it means to hold power over another person's life. We talk about how important it is to never stop seeking the truth. And more importantly, we talk about the value of every human life, even in a place built for punishment. The story of Sing Sing is not just history. It is a mirror held up to the justice system, a reminder of what must never be repeated, and what must always be improved. Inside Sing Sing, death row was born, but inside those same walls, America learned powerful lessons. That changed the way the country sees justice forever. The silent room still speaks. The camera returns to the old execution chamber. The light is dim. Dust floats quietly in the air. The wooden chair, once the center of fear, judgment, and final moments, now sits unused, untouched, but never forgotten. No straps. No wires. No hum of electricity. Just silence. But somehow, that silence feels louder than any sound. Because this room is not empty. It holds stories. Stories of guilt. Stories of innocence. Stories of justice. Stories of regret. Stories of families broken, and families praying for closure. The walls have absorbed the voices of chaplains, guards, and prisoners who walked the last mile. They carry the quiet footsteps of men who never returned. They remember the shaking hands of witnesses and the steady voice of wardens doing a job they never wanted. And even though the chair never turns on again, the room still teaches us something powerful. A justice system must never stop questioning itself. Because a life, any life, is something that can't be returned once taken. As the camera slowly backs away, the old chair fades into darkness. The door closes with a soft echo. And the story of Sing Sing, the place where death row was born, travels with us as a reminder to choose fairness, to choose truth, to choose humanity, to learn from the past, so the future doesn't repeat it.